Hello, everyone. Got a few dirty jokes for you today.
So a police officer was on patrol at night and saw two men fighting in the middle of the street in front of a house. He flashed his police lights, hopped out the car, and pulled the two men apart. He cuffed them both and sat them apart from each other on the sidewalk. "Enough. Explain what is going on here," the policeman said to the first man. "Well," the first man sighed, "it all started a few nights ago when I thought my girlfriend was cheating on me. I came around to her place to surprise her and found her watching a movie with two suspiciously empty pizza boxes next to her. She said she was just hungry, but who the hell orders two large pizzas to themselves?" "A valid point," the policeman nodded. "Anyway," the first man continued, "I decided to stake out her house. So I'm waiting here out in the street, watching to see if anyone goes into that pink house on the other side of the road. I have my mate at the pizza shop deliver me a pizza while I wait. Everything's quiet, and I'm just about to start eating my pizza until I see that dickhead over there come creeping around the side of the house." "That man over there?" the policeman asked. "Yes, so naturally I confronted him, and he denied seeing my girl. Next thing you know, we're in the middle of a brawl, and then you arrive." The policeman thought for a moment, then undid the cuffs. "Here's the deal. Give me your pizza, and I'll let you drive away with a warning." The first man nodded grumpily, hopped in his car, and drove off. The policeman placed the pizza in his car, and then walked over to the second man. "That guy says you sleeping with his girlfriend," the policeman stated. "I did no such thing," the second man roared. "So what were you doing?" the policeman asked. "Well," the second man mumbled, "darn, you'll catch me anyways when you search me." "All right, I was trying to rob the place." "That's hardly any better," the policeman replied. "The windows were locked up tight, so I decided to give up. Next thing I know, some guy is screaming at me, saying I'm having a thing with his girl. We ended up in a fight. Then you turn up." "Empty your pockets," the policeman said. The second man pulled out lockpicking tools, a skeleton key, and a pair of diamond earrings from the last house he had robbed. "I'll take those," the policeman said, "but because I'm in a good mood, I'll let you go." The second man couldn't believe his luck. He skipped away down the street. Suddenly, the lights at the front of the house turned on. A woman came marching out. "What the hell is going on out here?" she asked the police officer. The policeman turned around. "Nothing, babe. Just got you a pizza and some new jewelry." So a policeman came up to me with a sniffer dog and said, "This dog tells me you're on drugs." I said, "I'm on drugs. You're the one talking to dogs." So there were three receptionists at a convention, each talking about how dodgy their coworkers were. The first said, "Nobody is more dodgy than car salesmen. My colleagues will patch up a car so that it will drive just far enough away from the yard before it breaks down and then claim that it was in perfect working order." The second said, "That's nothing. I work in a law office. They'll represent your coworkers in court and make sure that they aren't responsible for that. They're the dodgiest." "Wow," the third receptionist said. "That hits close to home. I recently bought a car that did exactly that. I drove it to work and parked, but when I came out after work, it wouldn't start. I took the car yard to court, and their lawyer successfully argued that they weren't at fault." "So which was dodgier?" the first asked. "My colleagues," the third guy answers. "I work for the local police, and while I was sitting in my broken-down car in the station car park, trying to get it started, one of my colleagues reversed into me and then arrested me for reckless driving. So one day, a drunk man busted into the mayor's office shouting, "This country is crap. This country is crap." An irritated police officer ran towards him and asked, "What did you say?" The drunk replied, "It's a disgraced crap country," I said. The officer decided to arrest the man, handcuffed him, and took him to the police station. The next day, when they went to court, the drunk claimed that he indeed said, "This country is a disgrace," but he meant Iran. The judge was irritated at the officer for wasting his time, so he imposed a hefty fine on the officer for abusing his power. As they were leaving the court, the officer said, "How is it that you curse and I get fined?" "Didn't I tell you?" said the drunk, patting him on the back. "This country is crap." So 2 policemen went on patrol, and at 4 o'clock at night, when they suddenly saw an older man walking alone in the street, wobbling and barely walking a straight line, they stopped him for questioning. Make sure he's not drunk in public or getting into a car to drive home. "Where does sir come from, please?" they asked him. "I come from the best place in the world," he answered in a very slushed voice. "This is my favorite bar that has the best drinks and the nicest girls. Each one is friendlier than the next." The man continued and winked at the cops. "It sounds like a great place," said one of the officers. "And where are you going at a time like this? Shouldn't you be in bed? What? Sleep? No way. I'm on my way to a lecture on alcohol addiction and its effects on the body, the harms of smoking, and proper social behavior." "Really?" an officer said dubiously, exchanging knowing looks with his partner. "Are you sure you didn't drink too much tonight? I seriously doubt anyone is giving lectures on these topics at a time like this." The man sighed and said, "Tell that to my wife." So, I got pulled over earlier today after cruising a little faster than I should have. The cop walked up to my window, tapped the glass, and said sternly, "License and registration, sir. You show signs of being drunk." I shook my head. "Officer, I assure you, I haven't even had a sip." He leaned in closer as if testing my breath, then said, "All right then, let's see. Imagine you're driving down a dark country road and you see 2 lights in the distance. What is it?" I hesitated, not sure where this was going. "Ah, a car?" "Of course," he said with a smirk. "But what kind of car? A Chevy, a Dodge, or a Ford?" I frowned. "How the hell am I supposed to know that?" He crossed his arms. "Just as I suspected, you've been drinking." I groaned. "Sir, I told you I didn't drink anything." He raised a finger and leaned in again. "Fine, another test. You're on the same dark road, and this time you see just 1 light in the distance. What is it?" "A motorcycle," I said, a little annoyed now. He slapped his hand on my car roof. "Well, duh. But is it a Honda, a Harley, or a Kawasaki?" I threw my hands up. "I have no idea." The officer smirked again. "Go figure. You're intoxicated." At this point, I was losing patience. "All right then, officer. How about I ask you one?" He raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." I leaned forward and said, "You're driving down the highway around midnight, and you see a woman standing on the roadside. She's in a miniskirt, fishnet stockings, high heels, and just a bra for a top. What would you call her?" Without missing a beat, he said, "A hooker, of course." I nodded slowly. "Yes, of course. But tell me, officer, would that be your wife, your daughter, or your mother?" There was a long, heavy pause. Long story short, things went downhill from there. And now I have a court date. So 2 female police dog handlers are walking their dogs. One says to the other, "I left my panties at the police station." The other says, "Let the dog have a whiff up there and he'll go and fetch them." 15 minutes later, the dog returns with her panties, her baton, a broom handle, and 2 of the inspector's fingers. So, a police officer came upon a terrible car wreck where the driver and passengers had been killed. As he examined the scene, a little monkey suddenly scampered out of the brush and hopped around the wrecked car. The officer bent down and muttered, "I wish you could talk." To his surprise, the monkey looked up and nodded. The officer blinked. "Wait, you can understand what I'm saying." Again, the monkey nodded. "Well then," said the officer, "did you actually see what happened here?" "Yes," the monkey motioned. The officer leaned closer. "What happened?" The monkey mimed, holding a can to his mouth and tilting it back. "They were drinking?" the officer asked. "Yes," the monkey nodded. "What else?" The monkey pinched his fingers together and raised them to his lips. "They were smoking marijuana." The officer guessed. "Yes," the monkey confirmed. The officer shook his head. "So, you're telling me your owners were drinking and smoking marijuana before they wrecked?" "Yes," the monkey agreed. The officer raised an eyebrow. "And what were you doing during all this?" The monkey jumped behind an imaginary wheel and pretended to steer. "Driving," motioned the monkey. So a man gets pulled over by a police car. "Excuse me, sir. We've been searching for a sheep molester in the area. We'd like to ask you a few questions, and there's a reward being offered." The man thinks for a second. "Okay, sure, it's not my thing, but I'll do it." So a man bursts into a police station, tears streaming down his face. He rushes to the desk and blurts out, "My wife is missing. She went to help rescue people from the flood yesterday and never came home." The desk sergeant, calm and professional, pulls out his notepad. "All right, sir, let's get some details. What's her height?" The man sniffs, clearly struggling. "Gee, I'm not sure, a little over 5 feet, maybe." The sergeant raises an eyebrow but keeps writing. "Okay, and her weight?" The man shifts, uncomfortably. "Don't really know. Not slim, not heavy. Somewhere in between, I guess." The sergeant lets out a slow breath. "Eye color?" "Sort of brown, I think." "Never really paid much attention," the man admits sheepishly. The sergeant pauses, then continues. "Hair color?" "Well, she changes it a couple times a year. Might be dark brown right now." The sergeant gives him a long look. "And what was she wearing when she left?" The man scratches his head. "Could have been pants, or maybe a skirt. Could have been shorts, too. I'm not exactly sure." The sergeant lowers his pen and folds his arms, staring at the man in disbelief. "All right then, what kind of car did she go in?" The man's eyes immediately well up again. His voice cracks as he says, "She took my Jeep." The sergeant leans forward. "What kind of Jeep?" At that, the man completely falls apart. Between sobs, he wails, "It's a 2010 Jeep Rubicon, fully loaded lift kit, beadlock wheels, 37-inch tires, custom bumpers, winches front and back, LED light bars, reinforced axles, performance shocks, skid plates, roll cage, leather seat covers, CB radio, and so much more." By now, he's practically having a meltdown in front of the desk. The sergeant, finally touched by the man's grief, hands him a tissue and pats his shoulder gently. There, buddy. Don't worry. We'll find your Jeep." So a police officer responding to a gunshot call called his police chief. "We got an old lady who shot her husband for walking on the floor after she just mopped it," he reported. "Have you arrested her?" the chief asked. "Nope, the floor's still wet," he replied. So one day a man was stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic, and he really had to take a shit. So he got out of his car and went over to a bush and took a shit in his hat. He couldn't leave his hat there because he had his name on it. He took his hat, and on the way to his car, he saw a policeman. He covered the hat with his hand. The police officer came over and asked him what was in the hat. The guy said, "It's a hurt bird." The police officer said, "Let me see the bird." The man said, "I can't. If I take my hand away, it will fly away." The police officer said, "Let me see the bird." The man said, "I can't. If I take my hand away, it will fly away." They kept that up for about 5 minutes. Then the police officer got mad and asked him one more time, "Take your hand away and I will reach in really fast and the bird won't fly away." The guy said, "All right." And he slowly removed his hand. The police officer reached in and grabbed a handful of shit and asked the man, "What is this?" The man replied, "You scared the shit out of the bird." So a police officer noticed a car weaving back and forth across the lanes. So he pulled the driver over. He walked up to the window and said, "Sir, I need you to blow into this breathalyzer tube." The man shook his head. "Sorry, officer, I can't do that. I'm an asthmatic. If I blow into that thing, I'll have a terrible asthma attack." The officer sighed. "All right then. We'll do it another way. I'll need you to come down to the station and give a blood sample." Again, the man shook his head. "I can't do that either. I'm a hemophiliac. If you take blood, I'll bleed to death." The officer rubbed his temples. "Fine. Then I'll need a urine sample." "I'm sorry, officer," the man said. "I can't do that either. I'm diabetic. If I give urine, my blood sugar will drop too low." Now the officer was getting frustrated. "All right then, step out of the car and walk along this white line." The man paused, looked at the line, and finally admitted, "I can't do that, officer." "And why not?" the officer demanded. The man shrugged. "Because I'm too drunk." So I was on my usual drive to work when a police car lit up its siren and pulled me over. My heart sank as I rolled to the shoulder. The officer walked up, tapped on my window and asked, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" I started to answer, but just then a car drove past and leaned on the horn. I tried again, but another car passed by, honking even louder. The officer frowned, clearly growing impatient. I took a breath to speak again, but a third car went by, blaring its horn as well. At that point, I just sighed and said, "It's because of my bumper sticker, isn't it? The one that says, 'Honk if you think cops are idiots.'" So as Chester left a pottery class, he desperately gave himself a pat-down. He was looking for his keys. They were not in his pockets. A quick search in the meeting room revealed nothing. Suddenly, he realized that he must have left them in the car. Frantically, he headed for the parking lot. Chester's wife, Sally, had scolded him many times for leaving the keys in the ignition. Chester's theory is that the ignition is the best place not to lose them. Sally's theory is that the car will be stolen. As Chester burst through the doors, he came to a terrifying conclusion. Sally's theory was right. The parking lot was empty. He immediately called the police. He gave them his location, confessing that he had left the keys in the car and that it had been stolen. Then Chester made the most difficult call of all. "Honey," he stammered, "I left my keys in the car and it has been stolen." There was a period of silence. Chester thought the call had been dropped, but then he heard Sally's voice. "Chester," she barked, "I dropped you off." Now it was his time to be silent. Embarrassed, he said, "Well, come and get me." "I will," Sally retorted, "just as soon as I convince this cop to take off the handcuffs." So recently, a routine police patrol was parked outside a bar in the outback. After last call, the officer noticed a man leaving the bar, so apparently intoxicated that he could barely walk. The man stumbled around the parking lot for a few minutes, with the officer quietly observing. After what seemed an eternity, in which he tried his keys on 5 different vehicles, the man managed to find his car and fall into it. He sat there for a few minutes as a number of other patrons left the bar and drove off. Finally, he started the car, switched the wipers on and off. It was a fine, dry summer night. Flicked the blinkers on and off a couple of times, honked the horn, and then switched on the lights. He moved the vehicle forward a few inches, reversed a little, and then remained still for a few more minutes as some more of the other patrons' vehicles left. At last, when his was the only car left in the parking lot, he pulled out and drove slowly down the road. The police officer, having waited patiently all this time, now started up his patrol car, put on the flashing lights, and promptly pulled the man over and administered a breathalyzer test. To his amazement, the breathalyzer indicated no evidence that the man had consumed any alcohol at all. "Dumbfounded," the officer said, "I'll have to ask you to accompany me to the police station. This breathalyzer equipment must be broken." "I doubt it," declared the man with pride. "Tonight, I'm the designated decoy." So the Pope arrives in New York City to a flurry of cameras and reporters. Outside the airport, a gleaming black limousine waits for him. The driver hurries to open the back door, but the Pope pauses, looking at the car with a wistful smile. He leans toward the driver and says softly, "Do you mind if I ask you a favor?" The driver nearly stumbles back in shock. "A favor? From the Pope? Of course, anything, Your Holiness." The Pope clasps his hands together eagerly. "You know, I hardly ever get to drive. In fact, they never let me behind the wheel. I'd really like to drive today. Would you please let me?" The driver stares at him in horror. The Pope behind the wheel of a limo. What if something happened? But how could he possibly say no? With a nervous swallow, he hands over the keys. The Pope slips into the driver's seat, adjusts his robes, and grins like a kid on Christmas. The moment he turns the key, the limo roars to life. He stomps on the gas. Tires screech, smoke billows, and the massive car lurches forward. The driver clutches the door handle for dear life as the Pope barrels down the road, weaving through traffic at over 100 miles per hour in a 45 zone. Horns blare, pedestrians gape, and the limousine flashes past like a rocket. Suddenly flashing lights. A police cruiser races up alongside them, siren screaming. The Pope reluctantly slams the brakes, and the limo skids to a halt. The officer steps out, adjusts his hat, and strides toward the driver's side. But the moment he peers through the window, his eyes go wide. His face pales. Without saying a word, he spins on his heel and hurries back to his cruiser. Grabbing his radio, he calls his sergeant. His voice trembles. Sir? I've got a problem." The sergeant crackles back over the radio. "What kind of problem?" The officer glances nervously at the limo. "Well, I pulled over someone for speeding, but he's someone really important. The sergeant sighs. Important, like the mayor? No. Way more important than that. The governor, then. Much more important, sir. The president? The officer swallows hard. Even more important than him. The sergeant, now impatient, barks, for heaven's sake. Who could possibly be more important than the president? The officer lowers his voice, looking at the limo in awe. I don't know, Sarge, but whoever it is, the Pope is his driver. So a man staggers into the police station, pissed drunk at 3 in the morning, and tells the officer on duty, I'd like to have a word with that bastard you arrested who broke into our house last week. Sensing trouble, the officer informs him that this is against police policy and would not be possible. You don't understand, says the man. I'd just like to find out how he managed to get into the house without waking up my wife. So John and Jessica were on their way home from the bar one night, and John got pulled over by the police. The officer told John that he was stopped because his taillight was burned out. John said, I'm very sorry, officer. I didn't realize it was out. I'll get it fixed right away. Just then, Jessica said, I knew this would happen when I told you 2 days ago to get that light fixed. So the officer asked for John's license, and after looking at it said, Sir, your license has expired. And again, John apologized and mentioned that he didn't realize that it had expired and would take care of it first thing in the morning. Jessica said, I told you a week ago that the state sent you a letter telling you that your license had expired. Well, by this time, John was a bit upset with his wife contradicting him in front of the officer, and he said in a rather loud voice, Jessica, shut your mouth. The officer then leaned over toward Jessica and asked, Does your husband always talk to you like that? Not always, answers Jessica. Only when he's drunk. So it's Soviet Russia, 1978. A Rabinovich is jolted awake by a knock at his door in the middle of the night. Who's there? He calls, nervously. A stern voice replies, Post office. Open the door. Rabinovich sighs, already suspecting the truth. He opens the door and finds 2 KGB agents standing there. One of them is holding an envelope. The first officer asks, Tell us, Comrade Rabinovich, what is the best system of government in the world? Why, communism, of course, Rabinovich answers quickly. The second officer continues, And which country has the highest living standards? The Soviet Union. Naturally, Rabinovich says. The first officer presses on. And which constitution best protects the rights of its citizens? The Soviet Constitution. Comrades, Rabinovich replies. The second officer narrows his eyes. Then perhaps you can explain why you recently filed a request to emigrate to France. Rabinovich shrugs. Well, I heard that in France, the post office doesn't deliver mail in the middle of the night. So a rookie police officer was assigned to ride in a cruiser with an experienced partner. A call came over the car's radio, telling them to disperse some people who were loitering. The officers drove to the street and observed a small crowd standing on a corner. The rookie rolled down his window and said, Let's get off the corner. No one moved, so he resorted to the loudspeaker. Let's get off the corner. It boomed. Still, no one seemed to take any notice. All right, folks. If you don't move after I count to 3, I'm breaking out my baton. The rookie cried. Intimidated, the group of people began to leave in a hurry, casting puzzled glances in his direction. Proud of his first official act, The young policeman turned to his partner and asked, "Well, how did I do?" "Pretty good," replied the veteran, "especially since this is a bus stop." So a man was pulled over by a police officer. As the officer approached the vehicle, he noticed a large number of knives in the back seat. Looking at the driver, he asked, "Sir, do you have a good reason for needing all those large knives?" Smiling, the driver said, "Why, yes, I juggled them." Realizing the officer was giving him a skeptical look, the driver said, "Sir, with your permission, I'd be more than glad to give you a demonstration." Cautiously, the officer stepped back and said, "All right, but you'd better be telling the truth." A few seconds later, the man was on the side of the road tossing the knives high into the air with ease as the police officer watched, mesmerized. Two old men happened to drive by and both gazed in astonishment. The one looked at the other and said, "Sure glad I gave up drinking. These sobriety tests are getting ridiculous." So a car gets a flat tire on the interstate one day. The lady driver eases it over onto the shoulder of the road. She carefully steps out of the car and opens the trunk. She then takes out two cardboard men, unfolds them, and stands them at the rear of the vehicle facing oncoming traffic. The lifelike cardboard men are in trench coats and appear naked to approaching drivers. Not surprisingly, the traffic became snarled and backed up. It wasn't very long before a police car arrives. The officer, clearly enraged, approaches the lady of the disabled vehicle yelling, "What is going on here?" "My car broke down," officer says, the woman calmly. "Well, what the hell are these obscene cardboard pictures doing here by the road?" asks the officer. "Well, those are my emergency flashers," she replies. So a man awoke one evening to discover prowlers in his storage shed. He immediately called 911, gave his address to report the prowlers and possible burglary. The operator at the other end said, "Are they in your house?" He said they were not, only in his storage shed in back of the house. The operator said there were no cars available at that time. He thanked the operator, hung up the phone and counted to 30 and called again. "I just called you about prowlers in my storage shed. Well, you do not have to worry, as I just shot them all dead." Within seconds, there were 3 police cars, an ambulance, and fire engine at the scene. After capturing the prowlers red-handed, the policeman asked the caller, "I thought you said you had shot them all." The man answered, "I thought you said there were no police available." So the police detectives were having trouble determining whether or not their suspects were guilty. They just couldn't get them to confess. After hearing word of a telepath who is able to determine if any person brought before him committed a crime, they decide to consult him. They bring the first suspect in, and instantly the man says this person has committed murder. He murdered a pizza man delivering to his house. Speechless, the police start to think this man is the real deal. "He has to be telling the truth," they say to each other. "We haven't told him anything about the case." They bring another suspect in, and instantly the man says this man is innocent and has committed no crimes. He was framed of burglary by his next-door neighbor, Bill Summers. The cops are dumbfounded. How does he know? We haven't told him anything about the case. The cops are a bit skeptical and decide to make a little test. They bring in a beautiful woman they know to have not committed a felony. An officer enters the room with her, and instantly the man says this woman has committed theft. The officer, knowing this is a lie, tell the man, "We knew it. We brought her in to truly test your abilities, and clearly you're a fraud." They dismiss the woman. "I would catch up to her if I were you," says the man. "And why is that?" asks the officer. Because she stole your wallet. So a man in his mid-40s bought a new BMW and was out on the interstate for a nice evening drive. The top was down. The breeze was blowing through what was left of his hair, and he decided to see what the engine had. As the needle jumped up to 80 miles per hour, he suddenly saw flashing red and blue lights behind him. There's no way they can catch a BMW, he thought to himself, and opened her up further. The needle hit 90, then 100, and finally reality hit him, and he knew he shouldn't run from the police, so he slowed down and pulled over. The cop came up to him, took his license without a word and examined it and the car. It's been a long day. This is the end of my shift and it's Friday the 13th. I don't feel like more paperwork, so if you can give me an excuse for your driving that I haven't heard before, you can go. The guy thinks for a second and says, last week, my wife ran off with a cop. I was afraid you were trying to give her back. Have a nice weekend, said the officer and walked away. So a woman driving along at speed passed over a bridge, only to find a cop with a radar gun on the other side lying in wait. The cop pulled her over, walked up to the car with a patronizing smirk, and asked, "What's your hurry?" She replied, "I'm late for work." "Oh, yeah," said the cop, already starting to write up the report. "What do you do?" "I'm a rectum stretcher," she responded. The cop stopped, then lifted his head. "A what?" "A rectum stretcher," replied the woman. "Are you playing games with me?" asked the cop. "Not at all, officer," said the woman seriously. "I take pride in my work." "And just what does a rectum stretcher do?" the officer asked. "Look," she sighs. "I start by inserting one finger in the rectum, then work my way up to 2 fingers, then 3, then 4. Then with my whole hand in, I work from side to side until I can get both hands in, and then I slowly but surely stretch it until it's about 6 feet. And just what the hell do you do with a 6-foot arsehole?" he asked. She smiled and replied, "You give him a radar gun and park him behind a bridge." So a man decides he wants to fish. Unfortunately, his favorite spot became illegal to fish in. Undeterred, he fishes for 2 hours, and at this point, he already has a bucket full of fish, and he's still fishing. Out of nowhere, a cop comes in and tells him, "You know you can't fish here, right? It's illegal. I'm gonna have to arrest you." The man hides the pole and replies, "Oh, no, those are my pet fish. I just come here every week or so, drop them in the pond, and once they are done swimming, they jump back in and I go home." At this point, the officer smirks. He knows he's lying, so he says, "Well, then show me. If you can truly show me that they will do that, then I'll let you go." The man agrees and dumps the fish into the pond. A few minutes pass. "So when are the fish jumping back in the bucket?" asks the officer smugly. "What fish?" says the man. So a police officer is walking his beat when he catches with his eye a trail of $50 notes leading into an alley. Curious, he immediately goes in and finds an old woman with 2 bags of trash dragging on the ground, one of them leaving $50 notes in its wake. He calls the woman to halt and approaches her. "Excuse me, miss, but one of your bags has a hole," he points out. The woman thanks him profoundly, but he, still curious, asks, "Hope you don't mind me snooping around, but where did you get all that money?" "Well, you see, Mr. Officer," the old lady explains, "I have a lovely house at the end of the street, and it just so happens to be right next to a very famous bar. I don't mind the noise, but every night there are always some drunkards that piss all over my garden," she said, her voice shaking with indignation. "So, yesterday night, I stood there with my pruning shears, and whenever someone got their thingy out, I'd say $50 or I'll cut it off," laughing at the amusing idea of those scared drunkards handing their money. The police officer lets her go about her way. But as she turns to go, he jokingly asks, "Is the second bag filled with money too?" "Well, you know, Mr. Officer, not everyone pays." So the police came to my front door tonight holding a picture of my wife. They said, "Is this your wife, sir?" Shocked, I answered, "Yes." They said, "I'm afraid it looks like she's been hit by a bus." I said, "I know, but she has a lovely personality." So a woman is flying down the highway when flashing lights appear in her rearview mirror. With a sigh, she pulls over. The officer walks up to her window. "Miss, do you know why I stopped you? You were speeding." She shrugs. "Oh, I see. License, please," the officer says. "I'd give it to you," the woman replies calmly, "but I don't have one." The officer frowns. "Don't have one? Lost it 4 times for drunk driving." His eyes widen. "I see then. Can I see your registration papers?" "I can't do that either," she says. "And why not?" "Because I stole this car." The officer stiffens. "Stole it?" "Yes," she nods, matter-of-factly, "and I killed the owner and hacked him up. His body parts are in plastic bags in the trunk, if you want to look." The officer stares at her in horror, slowly backs away, and calls for backup. Within minutes, 5 police cars surround her vehicle. A senior sergeant steps forward, his hand resting on his half-drawn gun. "Miss, could you please step out of the car?" She steps out calmly. "Is there a problem, sir?" The sergeant says carefully, "One of my officers reported that you stole this car and murdered the owner. Could you open the trunk for me?" "Of course," she says, popping the trunk. "It's empty." The sergeant blinks. "Is this your car, miss?" "Yes," she says, pulling out her registration papers. The sergeant checks them and looks puzzled. "And your driver's license?" The woman reaches into her purse, pulls out her wallet, and hands him a valid license. The sergeant turns, baffled, to the first officer. "But he said you didn't have a license, that you stole the car, and that you murdered the owner." The woman smirks. "Yeah, and I bet that bastard told you I was speeding too." So a man calls the police and reports that his girlfriend has gone missing. A male and a female police officer turn up at his house and begin to interview him. The female officer asks the man if he has any theories on where she might be. The man responds with, "This is going to sound weird, but I think she disappeared into the magic coffee table." The officers look confused and ask him to elaborate. "It's really strange, but whenever I leave things on this coffee table, they disappear and reappear somewhere else. When I leave takeaway containers on it, they disappear and reappear in the trash. When I leave dirty plates and mugs on it, they disappear and reappear in the cupboards washed, dried, and stacked neatly. And even when I leave my dirty clothes on it, they disappear and reappear cleaned and neatly folded on my bed." The female police officer looks at the man and says, "Oh my God, you're an idiot. No wonder your girlfriend has left you." And the male officer says, "I don't think she's left him. I think he's right. I've got the same coffee table at my house." So 5 Scotsmen in an Audi Quattro arrived at an Irish border checkpoint. Patty, the officer stops them and tells them, it is illegal to put 5 people in a Quattro. Quattro means 4. Quattro is just the name of the automobile. The Scotsmen retort in disbelief. Look at the papers. This car is designed to carry 5 persons. You cannot pull that one on me, replies Patty. Quattro means 4. You have 5 people in your car, and you are therefore breaking the law. The Scotsmen reply angrily, you idiot. Call your supervisor over. I want to speak to someone with more intelligence. Sorry, responds Patty. Murphy is busy with 2 guys in a Fiat Uno. So sitting on the edge of the highway waiting to catch speeders, a state police officer saw a car driving along at 22 miles per hour. He thinks to himself, that car is just as dangerous as a speeder. So, he turns his lights on and pulls the car over. Approaching the car, he notices there are 5 old ladies, 2 in the front and 3 in the back, wide-eyed and looking like ghosts. The driver, obviously confused, said, Officer, I don't understand. I wasn't going over the speed limit. What did you pull me over for? Miss, the officer said, you should know that driving slower than the speed limit can also be dangerous. Slower than the speed limit? No, sir. I was doing exactly 22 miles an hour, the old woman said proudly. The officer, trying not to laugh, explains that 22 is the route number, not the speed limit. A little embarrassed, the woman smiled and thanked the officer for pointing out her error. Before I go, miss, I have to ask, is everyone okay? These women seem badly shaken and haven't said a word since I pulled you over. Oh, they'll be all right in a minute, officer. We just got off Route 142. So a police officer in a small town stopped a motorist who was speeding down Main Street. But officer, the man began, I can explain. Just be quiet, snapped the officer. I'm going to let you cool your heels in jail until the chief gets back. Officer, I just wanted to say, and I said to keep quiet. You're going to jail. A few hours later, the officer looked in on his prisoner. The guy looked really down. So, to cheer him up a bit, he said, lucky for you that the chief is at his daughter's wedding. He'll be in a good mood when he gets back. Don't count on it, came the gloomy answer from the cell. I'm the groom. So a man was speeding down the highway, feeling secure in a gaggle of cars all traveling at the same speed. However, as they passed a speed trap, he got nailed with an infrared speed detector and was promptly greeted by the wail of a siren and flashing lights. Cursing his luck, the man immediately knew what was coming, so he slowed down and pulled over. The officer got out of his cruiser, as calm as can be, and walked over to the man's car. He handed him the citation, received his signature, and was about to walk away when the man asked, Officer, I know I was speeding, but I don't think it's fair there were plenty of other cars around me who were going just as fast, so why did only me get the ticket? Ever go fishing? The policeman suddenly asked the man. Yeah, the startled man replied. The officer grinned and added, Ever catch all the fish? So a policeman is walking down the street one day when he notices a very small boy trying to press a doorbell on a house across the street. However, the boy is very small, and the doorbell is too high for him to reach. After watching the boy's efforts for some time, the policeman moves closer to the boy's position. He steps smartly across the street, walks up behind the little fellow, and placing his hand kindly on the child's shoulder, leans over and gives the doorbell a solid ring. Crouching down to the child's level, the policeman smiles benevolently and asks, And now what, my little man? The kid smiled and said, Now we run. So a man was driving his car when he reached a light. The light turned yellow just in front of him. He did the right thing, stopping at the crosswalk, even though he could have beaten the red light by accelerating through the intersection. The tailgating woman was furious and honked her horn, screaming in frustration as she missed her chance to get through the intersection. Dropping her cell phone and makeup as she was still in mid-rant, she heard a tap on her window and looked up into the face of a very serious police officer. The officer ordered her to exit her car with her hands up. He took her to the police station, where she was searched, fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell. After a couple of hours, a policeman approached the cell and opened the door. She was escorted back to the booking desk, where the arresting officer was waiting with her personal effects. He said, "I'm very sorry for this mistake. You see, I pulled up behind your car while you were blowing your horn, flipping off the guy in front of you and cussing a blue streak at him, and I noticed the 'What Would Jesus Do' bumper sticker, the Choose Life license plate holder, the Follow Me to Sunday School bumper sticker, and the chrome-plated Christian fish emblem on the trunk. So naturally, I assumed you had stolen the car." So a man calls the police, upset that his house has been broken into and his toilet used. The owner says that nothing has been stolen, and the police officer finds no signs of forced entry. "Why exactly did you call the police?" he asks. The owner takes the officer into the bathroom and shows him the toilet bowl. "What do you see?" he asks. "A turd," says the officer. "Exactly," says the owner. "I didn't do it, my wife didn't do it, and my mother-in-law didn't do it. So I want an investigation." "I'm sorry," says the officer, beginning to leave. "I can't initiate an investigation with just a turd to go on." The owner is furious and follows the police officer into the street, shouting, "What about the turd?" "Keep it for 7 days," responds the officer, "and if nobody claims it, the thing is yours." So there was a young fellow who was quite inventive and was always trying out new things. One day, he thought he'd see just how fast a bicycle could go before it became uncontrollable. He asked his friend, who owned an old Chevelle, if he could tie his bike to the bumper of his car to test his theory. His friend said, "Sure." So the young man tied his bike to the back of the car and said to his friend, "I'll ring my bike bell once if I want you to go faster, twice if I want you to maintain speed, and repeatedly if I want you to slow down." With that, off they went. Things were going pretty well, with the car driver slowly speeding up to well over 60 miles per hour. The young fellow on the bike was handling the speed just fine. But all of a sudden, an orange Camaro came up beside them, and before you knew it, the fellow driving the Chevelle forgot all about the fellow on the bike and took to drag racing the Chevelle. A little further down the road sat Officer John in his police cruiser, radar gun at the ready. He heard the two cars before his radar flashed 105 miles per hour. He called into headquarters on his radio. "Hey, you guys aren't going to believe this, but there's a Camaro and a Chevelle racing out here on Highway 3, and there's a guy on a bike ringing his bell and waving his arms, trying to pass them." So a farmer named Rick had a car accident. In court, the trucking company's lawyer was questioning Rick. "Didn't you say, at the moment of the accident, 'I'm fine'?" asked the lawyer. Rick responded, "Well, I'll tell you what happened. I had just loaded my favorite mule, Bessie, into the—" "I did not ask you for any details," the lawyer interrupted. "Just answer the question. Did you not say at the scene of the accident, 'I'm fine'?" Rick said, "Well, I had just got Bessie into the trailer and I was driving down the road." The lawyer interrupted again and said, "Judge, I'm trying to establish the fact that at the scene of the accident, this man told the highway patrolman on the scene that he was just fine. Now, several weeks after the accident, he is trying to sue my client. I believe he is a fraud. Please tell him to simply answer the question. By this time, the judge was fairly interested in Rick's answer and said to the lawyer I'd like to hear what he has to say about his favorite mule, Bessie. Rick thanked the judge and proceeded. Well, as I was saying, I had just loaded Bessie, my favorite mule, into the trailer and was driving down the highway when this huge semi-truck and trailer ran the stop sign and smacked my truck right in the side. I was thrown into one ditch and Bessie was thrown into the other. I was hurting real bad and didn't want to move. However, I could hear old Bessie moaning and groaning. I knew she was in terrible shape just by her groans. When the highway patrolman came on the scene, he could hear Bessie moaning and groaning, so he went over to her. After he looked at her and saw her near fatal condition, he took out his rifle and shot her between the eyes. Then the patrolman came across the road, rifle still in hand, looked at me and said, "How are you feeling?" Now, what the heck would you say? So a London lawyer runs a stop sign and gets pulled over by a Scottish cop. The lawyer, convinced he's far smarter than the officer, decides to show off his education and have some fun at the cop's expense. The cop walks up and says, "License and registration, please." The lawyer smirks. "What for?" "You didn't come to a complete stop at the stop sign." The cop replies, "I slowed down, and no one was coming," the lawyer argues. "Slowing down isn't stopping," the cop says. "License and registration, please." The lawyer rolls his eyes. "What's the difference?" "The difference," the cop explains, "is that the law requires a full stop. License and registration." The lawyer grins. "Tell you what, if you can show me the legal difference between slowing down and stopping, I'll give you my license and registration and take the ticket. But if you can't, you let me go free." The cop pauses, then nods. "Sounds fair. Step out of the vehicle, sir." The lawyer smugly gets out of the car. The cop pulls out his baton and starts beating the lawyer. Between swings, he growls, "Now, do you want me to stop or just slow down?" So the local police chief always said it could be worse. Every time there was a crime, no matter how terrible, he would hear the details from his officers and say, "It could be worse." One day, police were called to a beautiful house on a quiet street that belonged to a wealthy local businessman and his wife, the Dunwoodies. When they arrived, they found the front door open and heard the sound of crying from the kitchen. The wife was sitting in a blood-drenched negligee at the kitchen table, crying hysterically. The husband was sitting calmly across from her, his hands covered in blood. He sipped a coffee. Bloody footprints led up the stairs to the master bedroom. A naked man was face up on the bed with a knife protruding from his chest. His clothes were on the floor, and there was $1,000 cash sitting on the nightstand. The investigating officers immediately called for the chief to come to the scene. "You know what he'll say," said one. "It could have been worse." A while later, the chief arrived along with the crime scene unit and a couple of detectives. The chief winced as he looked at the bloody scene in the bedroom, then walked away, shaking his head. "Well, it could have been worse," he said. One of the cops, feeling brave, called out to him, "Chief, I have to ask, how? I mean, a man is dead. His family is destroyed. Mr. Dunwoody found out his wife is a high-priced escort and committed murder, and now the Dunwoody's kids' lives are ruined. How could it possibly have been worse? The chief looked at him for a moment and replied, "Well, for one thing, if this had been yesterday, the dead guy would have been me." So a police officer pulls over an elderly female for speeding while driving her husband to a doctor's appointment. The officer approaches the vehicle and attempts to explain that he stopped her for speeding. She looks at her husband and asks, "What did he say?" The husband replies, "He said he stopped you for speeding." The officer asked the elderly female for her driver's license, and she turned and asked her husband, "What did he say?" The husband replies, "He wants to see your driver's license." The woman hands the officer her license, and he sees that she is from his old hometown. The officer tells the couple that he remembered the town because he had the worst sexual experience of his life there. The woman looks at her husband and asked, "What did he say?" The husband replies, "He says he knows you."